It's all good. So yeah, I'm going to speak today. This is a relatively new presentation that I've developed in the last few months, trying to pull together a few different strands of research which I've been engaged in over the last 5 or 6 years. The title is Profit Motives. It's a play on words, as I'm sure you can imagine. We're talking about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology and speculative assets. So profits, P-R-O-F-I-T-S, always at the forefront of people's minds. But I want to impress upon you, I hope I can impress upon you today, that there are also profit motives of the other kind, the P-R-O-P-H-E-T motives. And what I mean by that should hopefully become clear as we go on. Yeah, come in. So yeah, just real quick, because Miguel already introduced me. Very nice introduction, thank you. I've had quite a weird and long and winding road. I started off as a scientist, master's in astrophysics, PhD in photochemistry, and exited from. I did a postdoc in knowledge transfer, all at the University of Nottingham, and then I had a kind of a parallel music and art practice, which was a hobby really since childhood. And then towards my mid-20s, the record label that I founded took off, and so I escaped from the university and focused on this label event series artist management consultancy called The Centrifuge. So the pictures on the center column, the top one is the disused mining facility in rural Sweden where we used to run a music and art festival called Norberg Festival. The middle thing is a bunch of musical kind of robotic sculptures that a friend made called Felix's Machines that I was managing, and we toured around all over the place. That is a picture from the Tate Modern Turbine Hall. We took it to the Pompidou in Metz. We opened the Glasgow School of Art new building in 2014 with it. And the bottom picture is an album that we released on the Centrifuge, on the record label. And it was through the process of doing all this music stuff. I was touring the States in 2013, 10 years ago, and one of the artists I was touring with said, "Hey, I've got a friend," we were in San Francisco, he said, "I've got a friend in Silicon Valley, let's go hang out with him." So we went to this friend's shoebox in Santa Clara. He opened his closet door and said, "Check this out, I'm doing this thing called mining Bitcoin." And he built a primitive supercomputer with the spare parts from Intel where he was hanging out. And he was very negative about Bitcoin in those days because the power in California, even 10 years ago, was really expensive. And so he was losing money hand over fist, making these stupid internet coins, which you couldn't really use for anything back then. Well, a very limited number of uses, let's say. But even though he was very negative about it, I saw something in it that he didn't. And it might be because of my refugee diaspora background. So I'm from Iraq. I was born in England, but my parents left just before I was born due to political and economic complications with the Saddam Hussein regime and anticipating the war with Iran. So when I found Bitcoin, what I realized was this is the money that the bad guys can't take away from you. So my parents had to leave with nothing. They left affluent lives in Iraq, and everything was taken from them. Their gold, their jewelry, their money as they left the country. So they had to start again here. They were lucky that they could. They came on their honeymoon. My father's still on his honeymoon 43 years later. Can't do that now. Can't do that now. So anyway, I found the thing. I was a bit skeptical of it at first, despite this kind of allure of this promise, because it wasn't realized back then. And then, as the years went and the market cycles kind of waxed and waned, I kind of went down the rabbit hole a bit more, and became a community member, participating, using these things, talking to everybody else online. And then I started writing papers, going around giving lectures, kind of setting myself out as an independent researcher. Meanwhile, I was trying to find a UK academic position, and I completely failed. I think I applied for 15 positions and got 0 interviews, 0. But then something happened, and I got a job at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, at the Media Lab, to found their crypto journal, Crypto Economic Systems. There was no visa. They gave me the job, but then they said there's no visa, surprise. So I had to run a journal conference series in Boston from Berlin, 3,000 miles away, which was challenging. And this was also at the time, the figurehead and the initiator of the journal was Joey Ito, the former head of the Media Lab, who was thrown out of the window a few months later because of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. So he accepted money on behalf of the Media Lab from Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein had been convicted and blacklisted as a donor. So they found ways to get, it wasn't even that much money, but they still took it, and the guy got thrown out the window. So you can imagine that that was a bit of a ding for the project of the journal. He was meant to write about it in his Wired magazine column. It was meant to be a big, high-profile thing, and in the end, we couldn't achieve those lofty goals, but the journal is still going. I don't work there anymore. We ran 2 conferences, 2019 and 2020. I just realised it's the 3-year anniversary of the last conference, which was, the pandemic had already started. This was like March 2020. And I flew over to Boston, I think like 4th or 5th of March 2020. And then the day after I arrived, we were having the kind of celebratory pre-dinner with the organisers. And at the dinner, we got the email from the president's office at MIT saying, all events are cancelled. But if you write to us, we may be able to make an exception. So we wrote to them, and they let us do it. And the way that we wrote to them is quite interesting, I think I'll tell you. So there's a rivalry in the US and in academia, and especially in the crypto and the kind of whatever, applied technology sphere, not so much between MIT and Harvard, the next door neighbours, but between MIT and Stanford. So what we said was, Stanford did their blockchain conference. If we don't do ours, Stanford wins the blockchain war. And the gates opened. So we did the conference. But what was crazy was, as the speakers were flying over, the borders were getting closed. So first it was Israel, and like the Israeli speakers couldn't come. Some people got stuck in Switzerland. So I think half the speakers made it, maybe about half the attendees. The videos are online. I actually found the video of me introducing the conference the other day, where I'm telling people to kind of shake hands with their elbows and do the Wuhan shake and things like that. It was quite, I was being quite glib back there. I didn't really appreciate the gravity of what was to come. But anyway, I moved on from that position, and now I edit a journal, also at the Media Lab, which is the Computational Law Report. Now, that is a law journal, and I have absolutely zero training or familiarity or knowledge with the law, so it seems a bit weird that I'm the editor there, one of the editors there. But because I have this kind of background in the governance of peer-to-peer systems without authorities, that shows one of the paths forwards for the futures, one of the possible futures of law. So I guess that's why I'm there. What's funny is now the other editors, they weren't really that interested in Web3 or crypto stuff. Now they all work in Web3 and crypto. So like it swallowed us all up. And this is a screenshot of a column that I write there, and I'm just finishing the next installment of that, where I kind of go over some of the, I guess, ethnographic and anthropological happenings, adventures and misadventures that I was in the room, so to speak, for, watch some kind of quite insane things happen over the years, as many of us did, just participating in these community activities. Okay, so here's my journey in meme form. So I found Bitcoin, I fell in love with it eventually. I really went down the rabbit hole. I remember bumping into some of my friends that last saw me in 2016, 17, and more recently, and they said, we didn't think you were ever coming back. Like, I was fully machine built. Like, I was, in love with Bitcoin, and to the detriment of all else. And then something changed in me, and I don't really know when or why or how. And I don't want to make moral arguments. I don't think it's helpful. I trust you to make your own value judgments based on your own principles. So instead, I prefer to frame things in terms of costs and benefits. And so there are benefits to something like Bitcoin or these other technologies. I most succinctly put, you can think of it as censorship resistance, so nobody can stop you from using these things. Tamper evidence, so if somebody screws with the network, it's very obvious. And the fact that it's a natively digital means of value transfer. So I can move across a border with $1 billion, just like it could be a sequence of letters and numbers in my head. So every time you go to an airport, and there's the sign that says, if you've got more than £10,000, blah, 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 and they take it away from you. That's what they do, because you're doing something wrong if you're carrying that much value across a border, right? Well, this is a way that you can not do that. So if my parents had Bitcoin back in the 70s, it might have been a different story for them, for example. So anyway, somehow my opinions inverted, and I kind of started railing against Bitcoin, And now I find myself in some kind of weird middle ground where I'm trying to come from a position of skeptical ambivalence. I'm trying not to be like just like a burn it with fire critic or a kind of naive booster, trying to occupy this space in the middle, and it's quite empty there because these technologies are associated with speculative objects. Everyone's got these coins in their pockets, and once you've got something in your pocket, magically your opinion starts to change. Yeah, so according to your incentives. So there's not many people in the middle, and so I think that's a healthy place to be. Also, what I've realised is it's quite a value to people outside the space. So all of my struggles inside the crypto space to find funding or to find work was probably because I was too critical for the people that have profit incentives, both spellings of profit. Whereas being a kind of like epistemic go-between, moving between fields and moving between knowledge communities, that seems to be like a nice place to be, and it seems to be well appreciated. So I'm very happy to have found a place. So yeah, I've been writing on and off, and a year and a half ago, I got asked by Spike Art Magazine, which is a kind of German-Austrian art magazine, to write an essay, a critical essay about NFTs and digital art. So I called that "The Revolution Will Not Be Tokenized." And really what I was saying there, and it's all online, it's on the Zero X Salon website if you want to read it. What I was saying there is like, there are affordances here, this is exciting technology that it opens new possibilities, but it's not revolutionary. Like, we're kind of continuing the cycles of assetization, financialization, and marketization. This is like another cycle of that. So I'm not saying that there's no value in these things, there's no worth in them. There's definitely, they're here to stay, and there are lots of interesting things we can do with them. But the breathlessness of the hype that we had, not so much now, it's calmed down a bit now, but in 2020 and 2021, I was trying to cool that down a bit, and it has cooled down by itself now, according to the market cycles. And we'll talk a bit more about NFTs in a moment. So I just want to say something about the Zero X Salon, which is our institutional research collective that we founded in Berlin a few years ago. And so it's at its heart is an event series. We do these kind of intimate post-disciplinary discussions, 20 or 25 people in a room. It's invite-based. Try to bring people from all kinds of fields. So think about designers, philosophers, artists, technologists, and so on. And not really focused explicitly on Web3, but because a lot of us in the circles we move in Berlin at Trust, the workspace where we host this, do have a background or familiarity in those technologies, it was something that we, even if we lean away from it, we still find it useful to use those technologies as exemplars or as little toy universes with which to, validate or critique theories that we have. And so here's a few of the topics that we've discussed at the Salon to date. So they're all kind of a little bit abstractly named, but I say abstraction. Abstraction was the first topic. Then interdisciplinarity, the limits of algorithms. We talked about kind of tensions between nature and technology, the ecological consequences of Bitcoin, which we're going to get onto now, the virus, and so on. Yeah. So we'll also talk a bit about the transcendental time machines as well in a moment. And the current topic is intergenerationalism, which is looking at generative systems, such as like GAN-based systems like DALL-E and Midjourney, and also text-based systems like the GPT, ChatGPT, and so on. So yeah, we started making art stuff. Like this first is memes, just like kind of critical memes. These are mostly about Bitcoin. I grew up with Magic the Gathering, this card game that came out in the 90s when I was a teenager, and so I always liked the form of them. And I find it quite a nice mimetic template. We set up a little kind of collective poetry unit, Cryptographic Poetics Researchers Union, the CPRU, which is a veiled reference to a famous group that came out of Warwick back in the day. And yeah, it's mostly like critical poetry and scripture around these topics. we'll get on to. I'll read out some of those in a minute. Here's the next iteration of the cards. We made a card game, which is actually still making it, which is, you can think of it as Twister for discourse. You know Twister, the kind of whatever board game where you can talk yourself according to the dots and things. Think about that, but for discourse. So like when we have a conversation, it's me, I'm Wassim, and you're Ross, and then Ross has opinions and beliefs and biases, and I have opinions and beliefs and biases, and we converse according to those. But the idea of the game is more like a role-playing environment. So we have different characters. You might be the libidinal materialist, or you might be the necro-primitivist priest. And then the ideologies, the worldviews of the characters could be modulated by some of the cards, or the topic could be modulated, and so on. So it's kind of contorting the subject so that you're not constrained by your own identity, your own beliefs. I think it's a nice way to kind of take your identity off, have a rest from that, and explore thorny topics from different angles. So we're hopefully going to finish that soon. We made an improvised radio play in 2021 called Swan Fake, which is around technology and governance. This is all online, if you are curious. And last year we got some money from the European Commission as part of their STARTS programme. This is interdisciplinary residency scheme between science, arts and technology. And so we developed a computer game, like an interactive storytelling environment, choose your own adventure type game, about Bitcoin boarding the oceans, which was on exhibition in Milan. And we're going to do a bunch of events around this next year. So if anybody wants to host us in Bristol, let me know. And we also wrote a play, like a fictional literary work called The Black Hole of Money, and we premiered that in a theatre in Denmark last summer. So here's a little bit of flavour text. So it's not, I know it's not Valentine's Day, but like I'll read it anyway. So Necrozetta stones are red, boiling oceans are blue. To halt the techno-capital singularity, you'll need more than a CPU. And hopefully there'll be some exposition a bit later. So I wanted to share with you a kind of cartoonish, weird, hyperstitional character that we created as a linchpin of the game and the play we wrote last year. So the older people in the room probably remember the annoying anthropomorphized Microsoft Office paperclip Clippy, which used to pop up in the corner of your screen when it thought you were writing a letter to, like, you know, annoy the shit out of you. Well, what about an anthropomorphized Bitcoin mining machine called Hashi? Well, it's a key character in the play in the game. And the idea is, this is in the future, because we wrote a 100-year timeline for past, present, and futures of Bitcoin. So the idea is that in the future, as the planetary ecology continues to degrade and Bitcoin continues to proliferate and require more and more energy, the public opinion is going to switch more and more vociferously against Bitcoin mining. So the cartel that runs, the thermocapitalist cartel that runs the Bitcoin mining on Earth, creates Hashi as a psyop, as a kind of virtual influencer to gaslight the planet, so that they can continue mining as the Earth burns. So like, it's dark and it's weird, but it's going to be funny. Yes.
It's kind of like that Black Mirror episode. You know that cartoonish bear thing.
Yes. It was a political one. Yeah. I forgot about that, but yeah, it's a bit like that. Yeah. I should watch that again. Yeah. And we're hoping to make a TV show for Hashi. That's like one of our current projects. Just looking for some funding to do that. And like I said, it's a character that exists and rises to prominence in the future. So it's kind of a hyperstitional thing that we're doing here. Like, we've got like merchandise of this character, and like it's going to get its own TV show and so on. So it's kind of like you're creating the reality you don't want to see. But obviously it's a kind of veiled critique, and it's humour. You know, I definitely don't believe the things that Hashi says, even though I wrote some of them. And there's a video of Hashi if you want to look at it on our website. So I want to say something about speculation in the markets, because if we're talking about cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology, NFTs and all of that, speculation is key. Like, ultimately there are like speculative assets at the core of all of these networks, and they are kind of traded in market venues, much like stocks and shares have been traded for or commodities have been traded for hundreds of years. And so you'll see that like these technologies are new and they're different from what's come before, but the market logics, the logics of speculation, profit and loss, they're very similar to what we've seen before. So here's a meme. Financial growth, sounds good. Exponential financial growth, even better. Exponential financial growth on a planet with finite resources. Oh, that's a problem. And in the bottom right-hand corner, has anyone played the game Universal Paperclips? I bet you have, Ross. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've played it as well, Miguel?
Yeah.
All right, okay. So if anyone hasn't played it, I apologise in advance for disrupting your productivity for a few days. It's quite an interesting game to check out. So basically, you're you're an agent and you have pieces of wire and you need to turn them into paper clips. That's your objective. And at first you're just clicking one button. You click the button once, you make one paper clip. You click it again, you make another one. Then eventually you get a paper clip machine. Then you click the button once, it makes 10. And eventually you're a hyperdimensional AI stripping the universe of all the matter to make paper clips. And that is kind of what Bitcoin wants to do. So Bitcoin is that kind of this algorithmically optimized energy vacuum. Right? It just wants all the energy, doesn't discriminate as to the sources where the energy comes from, doesn't care if it's coal or if it's fusion or if it's hydro, it does not care, cannot care, lacks the sensitivity to discriminate between the sources. And because of the way that Bitcoin works, and I'll get onto it a little bit later, I don't want to get too technical, but there's one feedback mechanism in Bitcoin where every 2 weeks the network adjusts the probability of a particular cycle of the mining, like one bit of computation. Like you can think of the mining as a lottery. So there are these specialized machines that do this thing called hashing. It's a specific computational process. And these machines only do this one thing. They're specialized machines. And so every 2 weeks, depending on the amount of computation that is pointed at the network, the probability of each lottery ticket, of each cycle of computation, to find a block and therefore get the reward of Bitcoin, scales up and down. So because of that, Bitcoin will never have enough energy. It has no chill. It will never be satisfied. And that, we'll get on to some of the potential issues with that in a minute. So, yes, markets and capitalism. We know it, whether we like it or not. We live under it. And we've been seeing markets and speculation around commodities, around securities, around monies for a very long time. So people used to call Bitcoin tulips. This was kind of the meme of 5 years ago. It's like digital tulips. Because there was this massive kind of speculative mania on the bulbs of these flowers, mostly out of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, which is very funny because I spoke at a Bitcoin conference in the stock exchange where the tulips used to get sold. And actually, the Bitcoin is dead picture I showed you earlier, me wearing the hoodie, that hoodie came from that conference. It was like ironic swag. So anyway, yes. So another quite interesting kind of speculative mania from the 18th century was the South Sea bubble. And it's not as well known, I think, as the tulip one, but it's really interesting. So this is to do with the colonial expansion and like the New World and terra nullius and harvesting the resources to bring back to Mother Empire. And so what was happening was people would sell shares in expeditions which would take place in the future to fund them. And after a while, people started setting up share offerings for things that they were never going to go to anywhere. They just wanted some money and then they disappeared. And there are plenty of parallels to that in the crypto space. So I put up this slide with the Wojak Newton because like Newton, many people think Newton was the first great scientist of the Renaissance era, and one of the great intellects of Earth, our history, our human history. But he was a terrible speculator. So he bought some stocks down there, good time to buy down there. And then he made some money and he sold his coins. But his friends didn't sell them. His friends stayed in and they got really rich. And Newton got angry and he bought more here, like mortgaged the house kind of thing. And then he got wrecked. Yeah, he lost a lot of money. So it doesn't matter how smart you think you are, the market doesn't care how smart you think you are. So that's like a cautionary tale. Please be careful if you have any, I hope you don't have any desire to invest in these things I don't have more desire to invest in them after my talk, but if you do, bear in mind that the smartest people in the world got wrecked by these things. There's a few examples here of crypto Ponzi's. So OneCoin, you might have seen there's a BBC radio series called The Missing Crypto Queen or something like that. It's about this woman, Ruja Ignatova, it's a Bulgarian lady, that fronted this pyramid scheme, an MLM, around coins. So they were saying it wasn't Bitcoin, they made their own coin. I don't even think they had a blockchain. I think it was just a cloud of smoke. And they would do all these big fancy events, kind of glitzy, kind of big stage, and exciting, and luring people in that don't have kind of critical faculties or the technical nous to discriminate fact from fiction. I remember once watching the live stream of OneCoin in 2017, I guess, where they decided they were going to double the number of coins, and everyone was going to get twice as many coins as they had before. And they pulled a big switch on the stage, and then everyone's coins doubled. But of course, if everyone's coins double, then nobody is twice as rich. That's not how it works, right? You're just causing inflation, and we all know about the impact of inflation on our lives right now. And so, markets go up and they go down. This is a picture of a Shiba Inu, which is the kind of mimetic emblem of an old cryptocurrency called Dogecoin, which I think a lot of people will have heard of, because one of those famous guys was, hyping it back in the day, that guy. And so he was hyping it around here, and this is not a new slide, but it didn't go great for everyone that listened to that guy. So try not to listen to that guy too much. He talks a lot. But okay, poem. So this is one of the CPRU poems. It's called Capitalism's Transcendental Slime Machine. I won't read it all. I'll just read you a couple of bits. I think you might get the idea. Object-oriented Scientology. Framing the problem so well, it creates the anti-solution. A self-unfulfilling prophecy. Tautological fallacy. All that is squalid melts into air. Abandon cope, all ye who enter here. I'll read the last stanza now. The protocols of the elders of slime. An engine, not a camera, manifesting its own degradation. The Mackenzian hypermodel, digesting itself for fun and profit. A lure for feeling, the sweetest honeypot, the emptiest triumph, the deadliest trap. So that's, some thoughts on capitalism there. And I wanted to say something now about the elephant in the room, which is Bitcoin and this energy-intensive process that it uses to reach agreement in the absence of authorities. So Bitcoin is like this peer-to-peer network. There's no king, there's no CEO, there's no boss of it. There's no kind of explicit authorities. And so the way the network reaches agreement in this kind of widely distributed setting is using this energy-intensive process, the mining, the proof of work. You kind of have your machines, you power them with electricity, and they do this computation, this hashing, and each one of those hashes is a lottery ticket. And if you find a winning lottery ticket, then you have the right to add the next block to the blockchain, the next page of the grand ledger of the eternal history of the network, and you get some coins from the network as a reward. And that is the incentive that keeps the mining going. But I would say that Bitcoin is really quite an inhuman monetary system. Excuse me. I see machine logics here. So I don't see, it doesn't seem very friendly to humans. It seems like it's almost not for humans. It's quite interesting. So as I said before, there's this one feedback mechanism in Bitcoin which adjusts the probability of the lottery tickets being successful. But apart from that, it doesn't have really any sensitivity to its environs. So it does not care what you think or what kind of energy you put into it. It just wants energy. That's all it cares about, really. And so the consequence or the implication of this, as I see it, is that proof of work, Bitcoin's mining system, puts capital and ecology against each other in a game of chicken, kind of a prisoner's dilemma style paradox. And Bitcoin might not be the largest user of energy on Earth, but it's the fastest growing user of energy on Earth. And we live in this planetary moment where we're not sure how things are going to go. It's not looking great. We have extreme weather, we have natural disasters. Should I close it?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And so there's a reason why nobody lives on Venus. Yeah, it's not a hospitable place for humans. And so if we don't manage the planetary ecology well, we might end up in the hothouse Earth that we've all been fearing. And Bitcoin might be like one of these kind of tipping point agents, let's say. So that's my fear about, like, if we don't address the elephant in the room, then that's one of our possible futures. Now, whether we can do anything about it is another matter entirely, and we'll get to that in a minute. So one of the topics we've talked about in the salon is this concept of the price of anarchy. And it comes from game theory, behavioral economics applied to networks, mostly like computing networks, packets going around like TCP/IP, like the internet. And so we all know about hierarchical systems. We're in a university, like there's a dean or a vice chancellor or whatever, then there's like people under that, under that, under that, under that, then there's the students and us. And so we know those systems, they work, and they're relatively efficient because of these kinds of chains of control and accountability and responsibility. But we lose agency, as a result of that. I don't need to tell you all that. You're in a university. And so, but conversely, if we imagine a flat system, like a peer-to-peer world where there's no explicit authorities, it's harder to reach agreement about things. Like imagine you're in a cooperative, or you're in a kind of communal, a group project, and you'll have equal say in something. You have to discuss everything. Like, or you live in a house share and you buy the groceries together. You have to painstakingly decide all of these things to reach agreement so that everyone's included and everyone's happy. So that in a way is kind of a price of anarchy. Like you're sacrificing efficiency. That's for freedom, let's say. But the price of anarchy in Bitcoin is the energy consumption. Because if we had a king or a queen or a whatever, muse, goddess of Bitcoin, they could just say, that person gets the coins, they wrote the block, that transaction goes through, and it would be very efficient. But then that's kind of missing the point, or the kind of unique value proposition of Bitcoin, which is that there are no gods and no rulers, only rules which everyone has to obey, and if you don't obey them, you're not doing the thing. You're not participating in the protocol and the network. I won't go through this too much because it's a bit more of going a bit more into the details. So we talked about the hash rate, or the mining and the energy consumption of it. This is a visual read of that. So the Bitcoin network started in 2009. This chart starts 2015, and you can see that is the zero line, that is the x-axis. So at 2015, the amount of energy it was using was pretty much nothing compared to where it is now. So this has been a huge increase in the energy. This is one of the only charts in Bitcoin that is increasing more than the price, the energy consumption. It does increase more than the price. It's kind of asymmetric in a way. And by the way, this chart is a little bit old. So, this line now is up there now. Yeah, it's gone way back up. And like the price of Bitcoin is down 70% from its highs, but the energy consumption is going up. So that tells you something about the mismatch between the market value and the energetic thermodynamic footprint of the network. Now, I drew these boxes to draw our attention to a few kind of interesting fluctuations. Now these ones, it took us a long time to figure out what was going on here. There are these kind of seasonal fluctuations in the energy dynamics of Bitcoin. And it turns out, until a couple of years ago, most of the mining was happening in China. And in the summers or the wet seasons in the south of China, the miners would avail themselves of almost free surplus hydropower, like Three Gorges Dam scale hydro generation. Especially since the construction boom ended in China, they used to put aluminium smelting plants next to these hydro dams. They didn't need so much aluminium anymore, and then the Bitcoin miners moved in to suck up the energy. Bitcoin is like a sponge; it just goes where the energy is cheap, and they're allowed to, and they just suck it all up. And so this was literally at the end of the wet season. The miners would the prices would go up in the south of China. They would unplug their machines, drive them inland, and then plug them in somewhere where they can power them by coal. So this is these are like migratory birds. These machines, they're migrating, looking for the energy, the kind of economic advantage of cheap energy. And the big fluctuation on the right was when China put the hammer down on Bitcoin mining. They didn't actually ban it, but they massively restricted it. And so a lot of the miners then had to go find some other place to do their thing. A lot of them showed up in Kazakhstan. And Kazakhstan was kind of like, we have loads of energy, welcome, new tech industry, jobs. But the problem with Bitcoin mining, and like, well, it's not a jobs industry, it's like one person, usually a guy, shows up with 10,000 machines, plugs them in, and sits there waiting for them to break, and then he puts a new one in. So that's pretty much the, and they take all the energy, they wreck the national grid, the energy infrastructure by sucking power out of it. So they got thrown out of Kazakhstan after a while because there were energy riots and like the grid started failing. And now I think quite a lot of it's being done in the States. Places like Texas, which has its own grid, its own cheaper electricity prices, and a lot of it is done off, like around the petrochemical, the Permian Basin where the fracking is happening. I think I've got a picture later of, I know somebody that he builds in shipping containers, puts shipping containers full of these machines and puts them above the fracking wells to burn the flared gas, the natural gas that comes off as a byproduct of fracking for oil. Now, if you don't burn the gas, methane goes in the atmosphere, which is terrible. It's like 1,000 times worse than a molecule of carbon dioxide. So burning it is actually probably net beneficial for the planet. But the problem then is that now all the big oil companies have seen that they can greenwash their extraction by saying, hey, we're doing Bitcoin mining to blah, blah, blah. Look how green we are. So like Exxon and Shell and all the rest of them are now doing this kind of weird greenwashing stuff. It's hashy grade gaslighting that they're doing, literally gaslighting and figuratively. And these are just pictures of like, so you're running a Bitcoin mining machine in the flood zone in the rainy season, and your place gets flooded, or these machines push out an incredible amount of heat, and so there's fires and stuff like that. It's really like a land of extremes. I used to mine. I used to be a miner, not of Bitcoin. I used to run graphics cards to mine Ethereum and other things like that in my house, and like, it was not a great thing to do in your house. Really, it's not. Really, it's not. Glad I don't do that anymore. And this is an empty former mining facility somewhere inland in China. I won't go into this too much, but I think it's interesting just to put up for a moment that so this is a decentralized faceless technology. It's just a bunch of, it's a protocol. Computers run this bit of code, then they join a network, and then they send messages to each other. Those messages are the transactions. So it's a very simple kind of proposition, but because we're humans, we project all kinds of stuff onto the networks. And so the narratives that have come through this thing vary a lot, from like very positive things to less favourable ones. And this is a bit of a landmark, I think, in the climate discourse around Bitcoin. There was an article a few months ago that suggests that the impact of mining Bitcoin, the environmental impact, is now greater than the impact of mining gold. So gold, where we dig massive holes in the ground, fill them with chemicals, rape the planet to get these shiny rocks, which we think are scarce. Bitcoin is now doing more damage to the planet than that. So the next thing on Bitcoin's radar is cattle farming, beef. So we used to call Bitcoin digital gold. That was one of the narratives we went through. Now the critics are starting to call it digital beef. So it's and remember, it's increasing. The energy footprint of Bitcoin's increasing over time. So it's getting more. And you can see here, this is kind of a visual read from Nick Carter and Hasu, two researchers in the space, of how the narrative evolutions have changed over time. From this quite utopian ideas that at the start, which were kind of, I guess, quite socialistic, the idea of infrastructural mutualism, that we build the technology together, we build the roads and the pipes together, and we share them. But I think because of the scarcity dynamics of Bitcoin, so there's a limited supply of the coins, and the analogy with gold, which existed from the very beginning of the network, with this mining analogy and with other things, it got kind of supplanted by this idea of digital metalism, the idea that we're kind of creating new kinds of precious metals, like in cyberspace. And I'll just say something about politics as well. So Bitcoin in particular, the community leans to the right, quite libertarian kind of vibe. And I don't want to make value judgments. Like, it's not up to me to do that. But the Bitcoiners are quite unsympathetic. They're quite a closed community. They're quite unsympathetic to the opinions of outsiders, which I think is also like maps a bit onto the right of the political spectrum. It's kind of like a little bit of an echo chamber kind of, shield. And on the right is a tweet from the guy I just mentioned that builds the shipping containers to burn the gas from the fracking wells. So that's his business. So he's in the business of burning fossil fuels to make Bitcoin. And so this guy is like the biggest fan of coal that I've ever seen. He loves coal. And he keeps saying things like, we green the planet with coal. He's hashy, basically. He's already gaslighting the planet. So he's, the most pro-coal person I've ever seen. He thinks that coal will solve all of our problems, will green the planet again, and all the rest of it. So that's what the incentives do to your value judgments. And so I would say that guy is an example of this kind of emerging ideological strain that I see in Bitcoin, which I call necro-primitivism, the twist on neo-primitivism. So these are quite kind of regressive. It's quite a regressive imaginary that that Bitcoin is so important that we'd rather see the ecology of the planet collapse than change Bitcoin. So it's extremely conservative. I would also say that because of the way that Bitcoin works, it's very hard to change it. So there's a very small number of developers, code developers, that are trusted by the community to propose changes. Then they get debated, and then some code might get written. Then the miners have to agree with the developers and the users to update the software on the nodes to run the thing. So it's very hard to change. Yes.
I was thinking because earlier you said Bitcoin is sort of creates this environment of anarchy where there's no laws, no God, and all that. Could you say that perhaps Bitcoin, it becomes the God? So everyone kind of serves Bitcoin and stuff.
We're going to get onto that. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Very, very perceptive of you. So I would say these are the priests in the priesthood, and they're worshipping the God of Bitcoin. So you can see it literally says necro-priest.
Yeah, that's what triggered my
Yeah. So that's also if you watch the video of our play, you will also see that we literally have hooded, robed developers in the inner sanctum of Bitcoin, pushing changes to the code and all that kind of thing. So we really played into this kind of
cult.
Yeah, or liturgical, religious thing. This time last year, I went to Malta to. I have an obsession with the Knights Templar, the militarized faith-based order that ran the Crusades on behalf of the churches in Europe, and I see a lot of parallels between the Knights Templar and the Bitcoin faithful. A lot. So I won't go into this too much, but I will say there's an essay just about to drop that's specifically on this, and I think everyone's going to hate it, which is probably a good sign. So yeah, I just wanted to say something about why I think this is an existential problem on Earth, and it's to do with the speed of light. So the speed of light governs how fast messages can travel through space, and because the Bitcoin mining is essentially sending messages to and from different parts of the network, the further away you go from the kind of the center of the network where all the nodes are, the more kind of hamstrung you are in the race that is the mining. So you can do the mining and find a winning lottery ticket, but if you can't tell anybody in time, somebody else might also find a winning ticket, and then they get to make the next block, and other people will be like, you were too slow, sorry. So that kind of means that we're stuck with Bitcoin pretty much on Earth. So we're stuck here with the thing that wants all the energy on the planet. We live under a paradigm of energy scarcity. I'm sure you've noticed your bills indicate that we live under a paradigm of energy scarcity as well. We haven't got cold fusion, we haven't got Dyson spheres, we don't have these Star Trek technologies for post-scarcity energy yet. And so Bitcoin is kind of like the elephant in the room. It wants all of our energy. We need some, but there are people that are on the side of Bitcoin, and there's more and more of those as time goes on. I speak this because I was one of them. I'm a de-radicalized Bitcoin maximalist. So I was also there. I thought Bitcoin was so important because we wanted to take power away from the state, from governments, from corporations, and return it to the individuals. But this is the cost that we have to pay. The price of Bitcoin's anarchy is this kind of ecological disaster that might well happen. And Ross, our friend Jay, calls Bitcoin computer science's first industrial accident. So this is code that has kind of taken on a life of its own. And we can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't really switch off the network because it's decentralized. You can't really change the code or the protocol. Because what happens is, if you try to change the code, there'll be a whole bunch of people that say, we're not changing. And they stay on the original trajectory. So there'll be then 2 blockchains, 2 networks. So imagine we say, we're going to green Bitcoin, because the World Economic Forum wants to green Bitcoin, Greenpeace wants to green Bitcoin, but they fail to consider the fact that there are these insanely conservative people that will never change it, because they're incentivized to and ideologically motivated not to. And so we'll end up with 2 networks. We'll end up with green Bitcoin, and we'll end up with regular Bitcoin. And so it's a very hard problem to solve, and that's kind of why I think that discourse might actually be the last tool we have to try and nudge the discourse. And it has moved over the years. Bitcoiners would just flat out deny the ecological elephant in the room. Now they start to talk about it. Now they're like, oh, we use sustainable energy. We're carbon offsetting. So like the conversation is changing a little bit, but I would argue it's not changing enough. But I don't have a solution. I don't have a magic wand, unfortunately. And so we talked about this kind of the god of Bitcoin. Well, here's something called the Necro-Primitivist Manifesto, which is a piece of liturgical scripture written from the perspective of Bitcoin to its followers. So I'll read you just a little bit of this. Crimes against virginity. There is no a priori nature. Nature is a construct. Nature must not be assumed to be benign, nor veridical. Nature is zero-sum. Nature is not fair. Nature brings pain and suffering. Nature's qualities must be judged, and its shortcomings should not go unpunished. Nature must compete with forces in the marketplace of ideology. Before nature, there was a pristine realm of ecstatic superposition, energetic and material forms, peacefully existing without an observer. Nature shackles the transcendence of light with its verdant gaze. Nature is a planetary liability, degenerate bourgeois luxury, misery engine. Nature is death. If nature is unjust, destroy nature. And I think some of you in the room might notice similarities to a well-known manifesto that some of our friends wrote a few years ago. And it's imitation is always the sincerest form of flattery. So I'll read you just a little bit more of this. Crony capitalism. Thou shalt have no other assets before me. Capital and code reign supreme. The dual canon subordinates ecology and labour, as it is written in my blocks and prophesied in the memory pools. The conditions for monetary transcendence must be seeded in the individual imaginary. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's clocks. Homo Blockonomicus desires a transcendental time machine, a thermoeconomic calendar for our rituals. I am the only refuge from the observer's gaze. Become time capsules aboard my monument. And it goes on like that. It's, I don't agree with these sentiments. I wrote this as an extreme provocation. So yeah, there's more of that. Let's get through. And I wanted to say something about time. So many people see Bitcoin as a time machine, or as an apparatus for the production of new kinds of temporalities. And there's a very well-known strand of research that came out of the University of Warwick at the turn of the millennium. The professor in NYU Shanghai, Anna Greenspan, wrote a PhD thesis called Capitalism's Transcendental Time Machine, which was arguably one of the best texts to come out of Warwick in that era. And in that, Greenspan was arguing that technology facilitates the emergence of new kinds of machinic, of cyberspatial, cybernetic time regimes that are different. They're clean breaks from the solar calendar, solar and lunar clocks and calendars that we live our human lives by. And yes, go ahead. Say again?
Can you repeat that?
Yes, yeah. So the theory was that these new kinds of machinic technologies, new kinds of technological apparatuses, were paving the way for new kinds of timekeeping, new kinds of time that are divorced from the clock, the 24-hour clock that we use, and the 365-day calendar that we use. So these are, because those are our kind of human, the way we keep time as humans. the day and the night, the summer and the winter, and so on. A machine doesn't have to live by those timekeeping systems necessarily. So the argument in her thesis was that she wrote it she published it in the year 2000, and she used Y2K, the Millennium Bug, as the example of the emergence of a new kind of temporality, emergence of a machinic kind of time. And so recently the PhD thesis that Anna Greenspan wrote came out as a book, and we were, myself and a couple of friends were very honoured to write the foreword for the book, to update and recontextualise Anna Greenspan's theories for the present day. We did that using the lens of Bitcoin as a decentralised clock. So I will say just a little bit about that. I'm afraid these slides are all walls of text, but I will do my best to make it not completely dull. So that's the book. It's out now. You can also read it online. So the foreword is on the Zero Epsilon website, and the Miskatonic Virtual University Press that published the book. You can also read the main body text there. You can download it all for free.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's really nice. This is a non-profit endeavour. Yeah, it was really nice. You can also order the book from Amazon, and it's really appropriate that Amazon stocks it because, that is a capitalist time machine of its own. So I said that the thesis came out of the University of Warwick in the turn of the millennium. There was a group there, like an informal collective called the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, CCRU, and they became very famous and infamous in the years since then.
They know some of them because Ian was part of this group.
Yeah, so their reputations precede themselves. So this was really important group doing kind of vanguard philosophy around contemporary topics, including technology. But you could argue, and there's this concept of accelerationism, which kind of was associated with the CCRU in those days, and you could argue that this is really like a philosophy of time, theory of time. And the philosopher Amy Ireland has this amazing tweet. It's 8 words. Accelerationism is a theory of time, the end. I think that's as succinct as you'll ever get it. So the idea here is that these new kinds of technology are being kind of co-opted and adopted by the forces of capital and capitalism to create new ways to manipulate the structure and the flow of time in order to decide the order of events. And this is especially relevant for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is really just a time stamping system. It's a timekeeping system, and all it really does is decide which order a series of occurrences happen. In Bitcoin, it's the transactions, but yeah, it's really like a timekeeping system above all else, in my opinion. I won't go into the Kant stuff because I'm really not qualified to do that. But yes, so there's this concept of two kinds of temporality that came out of, I suppose, this is from I guess Deleuze and Guattari. Maybe you know more about this, Miguel, than I do. The Chronos and the Aeon.
Yes.
Bergson or something?
Well, yeah, I think it's Bergson's influence on the list.
So the duration kind of became Aeon, or Kairos. Yeah. So we have this concept from Greece, from ancient Greek, of Chronos and Kairos. So Chronos is the time of the clock, the kind of linear metric precision time, and Kairos is the time of opportunity, the subjective kind of perception of time. And so sometimes when you're in a really boring lecture about cryptocurrency, time might feel like it's going really slowly, but when you're having fun with your friends, it might go really fast, and that is kind of like Kairos in effect. But if you were sat there watching the seconds tick, you will be, then you're watching paint dry, you're watching the linear metric succession of time. And so this is a quote from Greenspan's text. Aeonic occurrences, so this is ruptures in time that are caused by this kind of that are associated with this non-linear perception of the passing of time. Aeonic occurrences break down the distinction between the constant structure of time and the changes which occur inside it. Aeonic events do not occur in time, not because they belong to a transcendent outside, but because they are flat with the single plane of immanence which collapses the distinction between time and that which populates it. So the move that Greenspan made was like from Kant, we have the kind of the transcendental structure and aesthetic, the inside and the outside, and so Greenspan used kind of the Bergson and the Deleuze idea of aeon to flatten this transcendent outside into an immanent plane of intensities and multiplicities. I think we can skip that. And as I said, she used the concept of Y2K, of the Millennium Bug, as a kind of a rupture in the continuity of time and a sign, a signal of the emergence of the importance of cyber temporalities. So some of us in the room will be old enough to remember Y2K. I just got to university at the turn of the millennium. I was 18 years old. And I remember the panic, absolute panic, that like literally the world was going to end, airplanes would fall out of the sky, nuclear weapons would get launched, all because 40 years prior, to save a little bit of compute and storage space, a lot of programmers building mainframes and important computing infrastructure truncated the digits of the year from 4 digits to 2 digits. So like you get to 1999, and that's just 99. And then like the computer is incrementing up by 1 each time the year advances. And so it's expecting from 99 to go to 99 plus 1, but it can't do that because we've only got 2 digits, so it goes back to 0. And then who knows what's going to happen in terms of these primitive computing systems that were still running everything. So the people that built these systems were under these massive cost constraints around computation and data storage in those days. And they probably didn't imagine that their machines would still be being used 40 years in the future. But again, we're in university, take a look around, there's like vintage equipment everywhere that's outlived its intended lifetimes. So I'll read you a little bit of this. As a literal and figurative representation of the limitations of digital timekeeping and machinic mnemotechnics, Y2K was an atimely exemplar of an aeonic occurrence. Much of the work that went into the thesis was undertaken with the prophesied chaos of year 2000 looming on the horizon, foretold but not yet actualized. Y2K heralded the dawn of a new millennium in the Gregorian calendar, dovetailing eschatological premonitions of apocalypse with concerns regarding the widespread and synchronized failure of critical technical infrastructure worldwide. Now, nothing bad happened at Y2K. The year rolled over and it seemed like nothing happened. It was a non-event in some senses. Yes?
Sorry, can you give me the definition of aeonic occurrences again?
Yeah, so we're talking about aeon as aeon is the term that Greenspan uses for kairos, or for the Bergsonian duration, kind of subjective experience of the passage of time. So that, in contrast to chronos, the linear metricized clock time.
So aeonic occurrence is kairos.
Yes, yeah. So it's an occurrence that is manifested from this kind of like the subjective experiences of time, or a discontinuity in the fabric of the metricized linear time because of this immanent plane of multiplicities outside. I mean, please don't ask me too many more questions about aeonic occurrences because I'm not qualified to go too far into that. Then I want to say something about digital timekeeping because so we had this Y2K thing because of the way the systems were built in the 50s and 60s. And then in the 70s, we got a new digital timekeeping system, which was Unix time. So on the 1st of January 1970, a new timekeeping system started, which was kind of like a bridge between the clock of the olden days and things like Bitcoin, these kind of like radically synthetic, disconnected temporalities. So Unix time started on January the 1st, 1970, and every second that passes on our watch, a string, like a long address, like a long series of zeros and ones, or like a long series of numbers, would increment up by 1. So it's a 32-bit number, 32 digits. So 1st of January, that's 0001, and then the next second it's 2, and so on. It just keeps going up, like the stopwatch or your odometer on your car. And so the thing about Unix time is it's also limited. It's also finite. It's also another like linear kind of chronotic system. So at some point, Unix time is also going. We're also going to run out of Unix time. That's scheduled to happen in 2038. So that's the next Y2K. People are already planning for it. Bitcoin is not susceptible to the overflow of its timekeeping system in 2038 because it uses unsigned integers instead of signed ones. So it has another 68 years. So we have until 2106 before the Bitcoin clock runs out. And it should be pretty uncontentious for Bitcoin to upgrade its timekeeping system before then. Like, nobody wants Bitcoin to, if you've got Bitcoins in your pocket, you don't want it to collapse. So it should be like uncontentious. But I bet you there's going to be some arguments, and maybe somebody will do a fork or like a secessionary movement. Just like, may not even be that they believe in it earnestly, they might just be wanting to make money. Like, that's very often how these things go. And so, yeah, between Y2K and Bitcoin, we saw this kind of increasing possibility of synthetic technology-mediated timekeeping systems. And what we argued in the foreword to the Greenspan text is that these take kind of two largely kind of there's two classes of architectures. There's the command and control, kind of the centralized authority system. So if you think about, for example, I mean, even things like GMT, like, why does the world run on GMT? It's a really good thing interesting thing to look into. So at some point, when Britannia ruled the waves, so to speak, there was a conference. They invited some parts of the world to the conference, and then they decided that the prime meridian, the prime timekeeping system, the 0 point of world time, would run through Greenwich. And not everyone was into that. So it's actually quite interesting to look at. For a few years, there was Paris Mean Time. The French, English and the French did not accept Greenwich Mean Time, so they made their own one, which was, I think, 7 minutes or whatever, like a few minutes offset. And eventually they fell into line. But that is a command and control system. So that is like, the big clock in Greenwich is telling the subjects of the empire what time it is. And like, you can also look at the colonial misadventures in India or in other parts of the world where the Brits would show up and build like Big Ben style clock towers with kind of the standardized time according to GMT as a mechanism of control, of regimentation control. So that like time and power have always been related. Think about the timekeeping systems in things like factories. So the owners of the factories, the capitalists, would install timekeeping systems, and they might then manipulate those in order to enhance productivity at the expense of the workers. So like time and power and time and money have always been connected. Even go back further, you could argue that the first public timekeeping systems were to do with the churches, monasteries, and prayers, and then keeping people keeping their lives regimented according to the needs of their religions. So the contrast to the command and control time is this idea of a flat peer-to-peer mediated temporal regime, which we would argue blockchains and Bitcoin in particular are the clearest and purest example of those so far. They might not be the end point, but that's what we've got so far. The most decentralized clock we've ever seen, in my opinion. It's a very expensive clock to run, but it's quite decentralized and quite novel. So I'll just read you a little bit of this. Yeah, we propose that distributed consensus-based timekeeping technologies, incorporating the mnemotechnics of what are commonly known as blockchains, but more fittingly referred to as time chains, can be apprehended as a realized instantiation of a generative substrate for the spawning of occurrences in virtual time as a byproduct of their production of chronic order. This ultimate abstract power and the concomitant shift in the temporal apparatuses at our disposal has ramifications regarding the increasingly fragmented era of patchwork modernity that now delimits the preconditions for experience itself. So we argue this is like a balkanization of time. Like, people are now seceding from the time of control, of empire, of authority, and making their own timekeeping regimes. Yes, now I just want to say a bit about how Bitcoin works in relation to time. So as I said, it's basically like a timestamping server. This is like a way of, Bitcoin is ordering events. So what happens is, there's the network. It's made up of all the computers that run the nodes that do the transactions. So that is all kind of like virtual activity. So say I want to send a transaction to Miguel. I do that, but then it goes into, so I broadcast that, and all the nodes that run the Bitcoin network then hear about it. And it goes into what's called the mempool, like the RAM of the working nodes. But it's not confirmed. It's not part of the blockchain yet. It's not part of the eternal record. That has to be put in a block by a miner. So the miners decide the order of the network's history. And that can have some consequences. Because if the miners decide the order of events and time is power, then like they're very powerful because they can decide what happens or doesn't happen and when. And there's some examples in other networks more than Bitcoin where there's this thing called miner extractable value, which is the miners see these transactions before they get confirmed and realized and put in the eternal record. So they see your good ideas. And so the miner might say like, oh, that's a good idea, I'll do that. And they don't put your transaction in the block, they put their copy of your transaction in the block. So that is the miners extracting value over and above the social contract that is implicit around the protocol. And this has now become a very major battlefield in Ethereum and other kind of more like the more complicated Web3 contracting networks. So MEV is a huge thing. It's all automated. So there's people doing the kind of sniping to extract value. There's other people trying to mitigate against that or offer insurance, or even like you can pass your transaction to a miner directly without broadcasting it. So it's like you whisper your good idea to your friend rather than telling the lecture theatre so that other people can copy it. So it's kind of like these are all kind of downstream consequences of the fact that we're producing different kinds of time and there's no explicit authorities in these networks. Okay, yeah, skip that. Okay, yeah, I'll read you just a little bit of this. This is kind of like where we left off with the foreword. What can we imagine to be the next part of this story? Does the trajectory end here with Bitcoin, with the prophecy of capitalism's transcendental time machine seemingly fulfilled? We suppose not. But unlike Bitcoin's radical mechanism of synthesizing historicities, as mere humans we have no way of peering beyond the veil and seeing which of our possible futures may be borne out. This is perhaps the most reassuring matter of all, that in the age of ultra-precision and chronic segmentation, the future is anything but certain. One speculation seems uncontroversial, that capital and those entities in the service of it will continue to desire, enact, and exploit ever grander conceptions and architectures of temporal engineering. For as long as there's value to be redistributed, there will be incentives to engineer more sophisticated machinery with which to manipulate the nature and flow of time. Today, whether we acknowledge it or not, we all live inside capitalism's transcendental time machine. And so, yeah, I think we'll leave the Bitcoin stuff behind now. We'll talk a bit more about Web3 stuff. Can I get a time check, Miguel?
Yeah, it's 12:30.
Mhm.
We have a slot until actually 2. You can continue
Oh wow! Okay.
as you want. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on, and then we'll see. Like when everyone's asleep, I'll stop.
Okay.
So I want to say something about DAOs or DAOs. This is more of a kind of a Web3 phenomenon. So we're leaving Bitcoin behind now because Bitcoin at its heart is a very simple system. And so a lot of people that were in the Bitcoin community in the old days, they wanted to see upgrades to widen the functionality of Bitcoin so they could do more general purpose computing with the network. But as I said, the Bitcoiners are quite a conservative bunch. So what ends up happening was all those people left Bitcoin to set up their own network, which is called Ethereum, and now everyone's heard of Ethereum because that's where a lot of the action is. Very little happens on Bitcoin these days because it's so constrained in what it can do. So I told you that I didn't tell you actually, the precious resource in these networks is not actually the coins, it's the space inside the blocks to get your transactions confirmed and added to the permanent record. That is the real precious resource which creates the market and which everyone's fighting for. Last I saw, the price of putting something into the Ethereum network is now 7 times more than the price of putting something into Bitcoin. So that tells you about how much more useful and in demand Ethereum is now than Bitcoin.
Sorry,
Yes.
Wassim, I was wrong. It's not 2. It's 1.
So half an hour.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I was. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, you should. It's good because I could talk about this stuff forever. So the reason why this is interesting, this price differential between Bitcoin and Ethereum, is that some enterprising Bitcoiners have now found a way to do pretty much NFTs, like unique tokens on Bitcoin, using a new bit of functionality called Taproot. And the thing that they're doing is called ordinals. This is kind of like the Bitcoin NFTs. It's very new, so you might not have heard about it. But now a lot of Ethereum people are seeing how cheap it is to write into the Bitcoin blockchain. And they're like, well, we can do that, it's cheaper. But the Bitcoiners are some of the Bitcoiners are really angry about this because they see Bitcoin as this pure thing for transferring value, money, transactions, and not this thing for like JPEGs and art. But the thing is, the protocol is the protocol. If you follow the rules and you pay the fee, the miner puts the thing in the block, that's it. You can't stop these people. But there are some Bitcoiners which are saying they're cheating the code, they're lying to the protocol, it's against the ethos of Bitcoin.
Sacrilegious.
The guy that said these things is hardcore Roman Catholic.
Right.
It's so hardcore, I won't say it on camera. He has issues with the Vatican, let's say,
Right,
yeah,
okay.
the ones that we all know about. But he's very public about those issues. But this guy's like an absolutely deranged Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely deranged. And so my hot take on that was that in one hand he's got the Bitcoin protocol spec, and in the other hand he's got some Catholic scripture. He's got confused as to which one is which. Yeah. So again, people project their own beliefs, ideologies, preferences onto these networks. And this is a guy he's a Bitcoin core developer. This is like a very influential guy in the space. We all know he's extremely religious, and we have to kind of mediate what he says through that lens. But yeah, so some Bitcoiners don't like the fact that people are doing things that they consider unclean or impure or whatever you want to call it, like unholy on Bitcoin. But like Bitcoin doesn't care. If you follow the rules and you pay the fee, the miner puts the transaction in the block, it's done. Can't stop them. So anyway, yeah, back to Web3 and to DAOs. So first we had Ethereum, which became a general purpose environment for the running of arbitrary computation. Anything that you can imagine that fits within the rules of the protocol, you can do. So it's really like an open horizon. And that's why we've seen everything from new financial systems to new art worlds. And now one of the most recent hype cycles was around DAOs, which are, imagine we build entire organizations on the blockchain inside these networks. So not just now like doing one transaction or like doing one cool little program. We're talking about building institutions. We build a bank, we build a university, we build a government. We recreate Airbnb on the blockchain or something like that. So that's the promise of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Now I would argue that many of these things are neither decentralized, autonomous or organized, but that's an epistemic problem and a semantic problem more than anything else. So yeah, decentralization is one of these words you will hear all the time as soon as you dip into the discourse around crypto. But it's very hard to get a definition of this word. People often use an antonymic definition. They say, well, centralization is when there's a god or a king or a ruler or a queen, and decentralization is when there's no central point of authority. I would say it's a slippery term to define. It's a non-binary phenomenon, so it exists on a spectrum. So you're kind of nudging towards centralization or decentralization depending on the architectural choices, design choices, the social formations around the thing, the monetary distribution of the tokens, and all the rest of it. So it's a very complicated thing to get at. I'll say a little bit about this because I think it speaks to the problems we see in Bitcoin especially. So Eric Raymond was an open source developer that was very influential in the Unix scene, in the open source computing scene in the 70s and 80s. And he wrote this book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. The idea being that the cathedral is the centralized hierarchical institution and the bazaar is the flat peer-to-peer one. And he was saying cathedral bad, bazaar good, pretty much. And I think that kind of was an okay position to take at that time. But what we see really now is that even the bizarre, even what we think is a flat structure, is not really flat, because there's always emergent human dynamics in these things. There's always implicit authorities, or like a mismatch of incentives. So imagine we live in a peer-to-peer system. It could even just be like the Unix operating system and the Linux Foundation. There's usually not much money to go around. So a lot of the people that are doing the development of these things, writing the code and programs, or even on the operating systems, they might not be getting paid, remunerated, or supported for their work. And the problem with that is then it's like a tragedy of the commons. So if there's not enough resources to go around, incentives can get skewed. So there's a great example of there's a package manager in Linux called npm, and I think it was just like one guy founded it, wrote the code 30 years ago, and he's still maintaining it. Nobody ever donates him money, nobody ever helps him out. He's probably got some other job or like whatever. And he put out a call for help, like, somebody please help me. And then somebody came along to help, and they injected malicious code into the package manager, which screwed up a lot of things. And like that could have been mitigated if somebody had given this guy like $50,000 a year or whatever, just to keep the thing going. So these are kind of some of the problems we see in these peer-to-peer networks. And we talked about the Bitcoin developers. A lot of them are just kind of like dudes that sit around their house coding this stuff up because they believe in it. And they might also be kind of in a straitened financial circumstance. So then they might get seduced by capital, manipulated, influenced. So these are all very real problems. And by the way, when I was at the MIT Digital Currency Initiative running the Crypto Economic Systems Journal, at that time we were the largest the funder of the most financial supporter of the most Bitcoin core developers in the world. So I was basically raising money. Part of my job was to raise money to pay their salaries so that they wouldn't get co-opted by malicious or commercial entities. So it's a very real problem. I think it's a bit better now. There's quite a lot of companies that work in the space that fund the developers in a kind of whatever, like I won't say altruistic, but let's say it's incentivized altruism. Like, so they're doing the good thing, but it's in their interest to do it. And then let's just say something real quick about Web3. So the idea of Web3 is that it's a new internet. So Web 1 in the 90s was kind of like Netscape Navigator, static websites, GeoCities. Web 2 was like social media, YouTube, Facebook, and all of this kind of dynamic web, e-commerce, and all the rest. But of course, the promise of Web 2 ended up with the web being controlled by 5 companies, and that's not good for anyone. So the Web 3, the framing of like blockchains as a kind of the new architecture for a new web, promises that we can get away from this kind of big tech oligarchy and return to a kind of citizen-administered, citizen-owned set of infrastructure, back to the infrastructural mutualism that the early Bitcoiners hoped for, that they didn't get. So it's this big promise of the new internet, but as with many things, like the promise and where we are right now are very different. So we hear these concepts of like the internet of ownership, read, write, own, public goods, or as my friend Jaya Clara Brecker puts it, the decentralized reproduction of the banks, where you create your own tokens, the state, where you write your own laws, the church, where you write your own scripture, and the police, where you print your own gun. So it's again coming back to this kind of self-sovereign, rugged individualism that we saw kind of permeating through Bitcoin. And there are lots of DAOs springing up now, like these kind of like whatever mutual associations on the blockchain, for all kinds of different applications. So think about mechanisms to improve the equity or the fairness of arts funding and to engender collaboration, things like Black Swan DAO and Culture Stake. We also see groups which get together to administer shared treasuries for profit. So they might be collecting NFTs or collecting some other kinds of objects. There's a good example called Constitution DAO, where they wanted to buy a copy of the US Constitution. So they bid for it on an auction. But unfortunately, everyone else in the auction could see how much the DAO raised because the blockchain is transparent. So they got outbid by $1 by the guy, Ken Griffin, that runs Citadel Securities. And what they do is they pay Robinhood, the retail kind of stock brokering app, for what's called order flow. So you and I, we're like kind of the ants on Robinhood. We buy a stock, we sell a stock. Citadel sees our orders, and then they can decide whether they put they can go in front of us, they can jump the queue. So that's what front running is, and that's a bit like the miner extractable value I just told you about, where the miners decide the order of events, and they can make bank on that. Yes?
Is that why it's really hard to make money on the stock market?
That's one of the reasons. There's always more sophisticated investors than you that have better technology. So there's a book called Flash Boys about 10 years ago by a journalist called Michael Lewis. It was about the front running on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So what was happening was, so there's an exchange, commodities exchange in Chicago, and we have a server in New York, and we send out orders to Chicago to buy and sell and whatever. But because of the speed of light, that takes some time to go from New York to Chicago. So let's say it's a second. Because these systems are largely algorithmic now, you can imagine if somebody builds their server closer to Chicago, they can jump the queue, respond to the market conditions more quickly. So what was happening was these high frequency trading firms were buying tiny pieces of land really close to the server center, the data center of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, to shave off milliseconds, microseconds on their latency, on their reaction time, so that they could be first in the queue to respond to a change in the market. So that guy that does that outbid the Dow for the copy of the Constitution. There's also kind of like more humanitarian, explicitly charity-based concerns. Like there was one called Ukraine Dow, which they were literally buying weapons for Ukrainians, or Assange Dow, which was raising funds for the legal defense of Julian Assange. And nobody's getting whatever, nobody's making money on this thing. These are charities, but they're decentralized. So charities are hugely regulated, and they're also bound by the countries that they exist in. So using a DAO to do worldwide coordination, there's a lot of efficiency gains there. Also, it means that people that have tokens that they bought 10 years ago that are worth a lot of money, they can kind of send them to these places, perhaps anonymously. And then, that's not may or may not be a taxable event depending on the jurisdiction they live in. Let's put it like that. Do I want to talk about this? I think I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to skip this. And we'll talk about NFTs. Yeah. So, I'm sure the hype and the buzz around non-fungible tokens and digital art didn't escape many people over the last few years. We just lived through a pandemic, and that pandemic arrested the gears of the art world. So there was no more art fairs, exhibitions, museums were closed. Collectors couldn't visit galleries and buy artworks physically. And so I think that precipitated this kind of massive rush into tokenized art as a kind of a way for creators to pay their bills, and a way for the art world to kind of maintain its, to lubricate its economic gears again. So let's say something about NFTs. Yeah, what are they? So the word fungibility is, one that may not be familiar to people outside of finance. Basically means equivalence. So actually I can do this today because I have my wallet. I didn't have my wallet yesterday. Yes. 2 of these ugly new plastic £20 notes. And it doesn't matter which one I give you if I owe you 20 quid. They're basically the same. And now, okay, there is a serial number on each of these, which makes them unique. But I mean, if we ignore that, one of these is largely the same as the other. So they're fungible. They're equivalent. And so by contrast, something that's not fungible is unique. Each one is different and distinct from the other. I can't exchange you one for another and it's the same thing. So that's the idea here. We found a way. So first Bitcoin made this kind of decentralized value transfer with fungibility. One Bitcoin or one piece of Bitcoin is the same as the other, largely. And then the NFTs were kind of a way to create unique digital objects of collectability and value. And NFTs have been around for a while. This wasn't something that just appeared appeared as a technological innovation in 2020 and it became a sensation. They've been around for years. And I think it was because of the pandemic that precipitated this rise to prominence, this interest in it. But what I will say is many of the people in the crypto space didn't really see it coming. Like, I didn't expect it to happen. We thought NFTs were they were cute, but they aren't the most sophisticated thing we've ever seen. And using NFTs to represent JPEGs is kind of like the hello world of tokens. It's not very sophisticated. You can do so much more with it than that. So let's think about what happens in the art world. We have a painting or a sculpture or a video or something like that, and we need to know that it's genuine. We need to know that it's been stored according to the conditions that have been specified. We need to know the gallery's taking care of it. We need to know who owns it and what they paid for it, and so on. So NFTs and the the blockchain ledger that they exist on makes all of that much easier and more transparent than it was before. So this is kind of solving a few different art world tensions at the same time, which I think is another reason why the art world entered the NFT space with gusto. So yeah, really it's nothing new. It's another record-keeping technology, a bit like Bitcoin and the blockchains that came before it. All the way back to clay tablets. We're recording, histories, debts, who owes what, complaints. It's really just another example of that. Accounting units, claims on ownership. One of the best ways to think about NFTs is by analogy with the signature of the artist. They sign the canvas, they sign the drawing, they etch their name into the sculpture, or they give you a certificate. I think a certificate of authenticity is a very nice way to think about it. They're not perfect, because the certificate of authenticity is also the mechanism of speculation. So that there's a tension there. I'll read this. I usually skip this, but we're in a philosophy department, so why not? Yeah, here's a bit of. I always try to get some Baudrillard in somewhere. So this is from Symbolic Exchange and Death. We now live in a world dominated by the free play of the monetary sign that's beyond reference to any reel of production, or even a monetary referent in the form of a gold standard. In this world, the idea of a real value, of equities, of commodities, of houses, of anything, is as meaningless as what matters instead is not value per se, but infinite speculation. This new world is marked by the emergence of a brothel of capital, not for prostitution, but for substitution and commutation. I still don't understand how Baudrillard wrote all of this stuff in the 20th century, and the new technologies come along and it fits like a glove onto them. It's really insane. And so he had this kind of 3-stage model of development, from the valuations of the raw commodity form, like gold or wheat or something like that, like a base commodity, to something that's refined. So from a lump of gold to a gold bar, or from wheat to bread or something like that. And then we end up with these symbolic forms, which are not related to anything that comes below. So I guess becoming now early stage tech stocks or tokens and whatever. So these things aren't really necessarily representing an underlying thing anymore. It's about a signal, it's about a meme, really. It's talking about memes. I'll skip this. I wanted to talk to you about, some examples in history, around conceptual art, immateriality and value, which I think are kind of interesting kind of corollaries with what we're seeing these days with NFTs. So this is Yves Klein, in the 1959 work, Zones de Sensibilité Picturale Immatérielle, where he was selling cubes of empty air for gold. Now, how do you know that it's the same air that he gave you? Well, you cannot know that, and you do not know that, and you will never be able to tell that, even if you boxed it at the moment of collection. But you got a certificate, which he signed. That's where the value is, in the certificate, not in the cube of empty air. So again, it's like the NFT and the cube of air is the artwork, the JPEG. What's also interesting is, and the picture at the top left is showing this, is that you could then have the certificate destroyed, and Yves Klein would throw half of the gold you paid into the River Seine in Paris. So There's also this kind of like Schumpeterian kind of creative destruction thing going on. And I think it's come full circle because now you can buy these certificates with cryptocurrency. So I think it's kind of like now the Ouroboros has been completed. And what we'll also say is that if you look at the estimate price, $250,000 to $500,000, and the fact that it sold for twice as much as that, I think somebody bought that with crypto. Like somebody, pretty sure. And this is now a crypto art project by Michel Chan, which is kind of extending that into, like, explicitly into the blockchain NFT domain. Michel Chan does some really interesting, both conceptual art and writing around tokens and digital art. So I'd recommend checking that out if you're interested in an entry point into the space. Another good example is Sol LeWitt and the wall drawings, from the 70s and onwards. And so what would happen is Sol LeWitt would create a kind of algorithmic series of instructions that we see on the left. Paint this color, do this, do that, work is finished. That's what's signed. The instructions are what's signed. Not the output, not the diagram, not the thing you hang in the gallery. And so where the artist puts their signature shows you where they think the value is located, or where the artistic, the creative worth is centered. So again, like where the signature goes is important, or what the signature represents, and how the signature is divorced from the artwork or the visual. So it's worth saying that with NFTs, even though like there might be a picture of a monkey or something associated to it, you're not buying the JPEG. The token is the artwork, and the JPEG is like a representation of that. Yes?
Is it sort of like buying something designer for the sake of the brand?
Yes. Yeah. So it's about the immaterial value. The label, I guess, is the signature in that case. Everyone's walking around with like whatever, North Face or Adidas or Prada, and like the Prada shoes might be junk, but like that doesn't. I'm sure that doesn't stop some people. As they say, the devil wears Prada. Maybe the devil also mints NFTs. So, yeah, I think we said this already. Yeah. Yep. Here's a good one. Some of you might know Piero Manzoni's artist shit, Künstlerscheiße, 1961, where the artist tinned their output and put it in a can, sealed it, and there's a limited number of them and they're numbered. So these are a bit like NFTs. They're signed and they're limited, and we know they're limited. You can still see these for sale, like Sotheby's. I even saw one in a museum gift shop not so long ago. It wasn't that expensive. I was quite surprised. But again, how many people do you think are really interested in the contents of that can? Like the 60-year-old artist shit? Probably not that many. So what they're buying is the wrapper, what it represents, the signature and the scarcity of it. And I think that's another kind of interesting equivalence with NFTs. So I've put a picture of a Bored Ape, which is like one of the more famous or infamous NFT projects. And like the art is not great. It's not. Like, it's hard to find anyone to disagree with that. It's pretty basic stuff. But they're very expensive because they're scarce, and because there's a kind of a big meme around the importance of the project. And also because if you own one of these things, they did an interesting move, Yuga Labs, who made this project. You then get the rights to commercially exploit your ape. And so there's a really interesting thing that happened a few months ago. The actor Seth Green, these are Hollywood actor guys, he bought one of these apes. He was making a TV show with it. Then he got hacked, and he no longer had his NFT. Then what? Doesn't have the rights to make the show anymore. And the person that took the NFT from them then sold that on to someone else. So then all of a sudden you've got an innocent person that's holding stolen goods, and the original owner is trying to use legal recourse to get them back. Messy. I don't actually know how it resolved itself, but yeah, messy stuff. So yeah, I would say that like the thing about when there's a token, this is not just with NFTs, it's like a general situation. When there's a token, it becomes all about the token. And so people kind of forget or denigrate the creative labour, the conceptual labour, the doing, the thinking, the making. What they really care about is the end product and the speculative potential of that. So I would say that this is kind of like a pornification, like a degradation of the value of artistic labour. And time will tell to see how far that goes. Yeah, I think we're almost at time now, so I will just want to find somewhere to wrap up. Yeah, okay. Let's wrap up here. Yeah, so again, like I told you about my article, the revolution will not be tokenized, and I wrote that because I see patterns occurring, and you could actually say it is a revolution, like a revolving door, like we're going around in circles with new technologies. So the art world, the digital art world, is reproducing the logics and the structures and the inequities of the existing, the legacy world with NFTs and with digital art. Across class lines, location, race, and gender. We have these buyers clubs, which are kind of like insiders that get preferential access to things before they go to the public. And we have influencers kind of hyping these things and getting their followers to buy them, and then they profit from that. So that is all nothing new. So that's we're just replicating a lot of these existing inequities. And I would say that one of the potentials of NFTs is that we might, with blockchains and cryptography more generally, is we might be able to imagine new forms of collaboration across collection and cross curation and cross creation that run contrary to the existing modes of power and influence in the art world. And that's where I see potential for these things. Not in this kind of mad speculation and hoarding and land grabs and all the rest of it, but that we might find ways to enter kind of post-capitalist futures and post-capitalist design spaces with these things. I'll wrap there. So thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Great.
Are the slides going to be on Blackboard?
Yes. If that's
Sure,
okay.
yeah.
You send me the slides
Oh,
before, right?
I sent you old ones.
Okay.
I will send you the new ones. I can do it now.
Amazing, yeah, there is no rush, but yeah. We'll make sure we have the